Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the final Great Decisions 2025 lecture for the year. Now, normally, you hear me doing all the talking beforehand. That's not going to be the case today. There are a couple people who wanted to address everyone here before we get started. And I'm going to turn the microphone over first to Darlene Wellner. You'll wait till I hand you the microphone before you start talking.
Well, I just want to say thank you for all of you folks coming year after year. And I know I recognize a lot of people. We started 19 years ago, and I'm wondering, are there people here that were here that first time?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, okay.
It was a snowstorm and Manitowoc School District had closed.
Exactly. It was an enormous snowstorm.
And we still had over 100 people here.
Yes, and we thought, oh, no, they come, it's just, the school district is closed, and they kept coming up and coming up and coming up those stairs. And this place was absolutely packed. And it was, we had two speakers. One was on the Israeli side, and the other one was on the Palestinian side. And it was the whole debate. There was some, touching words there. Yeah. But we were really off to a start, and it just had rolled along since then. And I just want to say, from League of Women Voters standpoint, the library standpoint, and Unitarian Universalist standpoint, we are just so pleased to produce this every year. And I'm just kind of the cheerleader, to be honest with you. I don't do a lot, but you do, and Kathy does, and Marilyn does, and they. In terms of the programming and the publicity and the radio and newspaper and so on. And Kathy finds a lot of the speakers, and Marilyn does too, and Marilyn does a lot of the mechanics of making it all work. And I don't know exactly what I do.
I make you go on the radio.
Yeah, once in a while. This year you did.
There was a snowstorm.
That's right. Right. So, but we're so proud of this audience, and that you keep coming back, and I hope you keep getting new people too. This may be the longest Great Decisions in Wisconsin. I don't know of any others that have this kind of longevity and or this kind of attendance. And so we're just real proud of it and want this to continue. Let's see, I guess I mentioned the organizations. Let's see. And the thing is that we've got Martin Farrell. And Marty he's been every year, he has been here since the very beginning, right?
I believe so.
Exactly. Yeah, and from Ripon, my contact was with Meg McLean, who was with the League of Women Voters of Fond du Lac County, and I heard about Great Decisions going on a legislative league meeting to a legislative league meeting. And she told me about Great Decisions and how successful it was there and so on. I thought, well, we could do that in Manitowoc. So then I talked to Marilyn, my counterpart here in Frank. So then we approached the library, and they were most enthusiastic, and I don't know, we have a wonderful partnership all these years. Okay, so, I don't know, I guess I don't have much else to say, except we appreciate our audience and the quality of questions and, your desire to learn. And so I'm going to keep quiet and let speakers speak. Martin Farrell.
Not quite yet.
No, I'm sorry.
Now, last week I had told you that I wasn't going to talk about the Great Decisions Legacy Fund anymore this year. That doesn't mean I'm not bringing someone in from the bullpen to talk about it. So I'm going to turn the microphone over for a second to Kathy Fishback.
Thank you, Jim. I just want to say what Darlene said, and that is to thank all of you for coming. There are people here that I never see except on Monday nights, and developed a wonderful relationship with all of you. Just like in church, certain people sit on the same spot. You know, from the university, over there, Robert is always there, there are people over there. It's just wonderful to see, and I think we have one person here, John is 93. Does anybody beat that? 93 years old. So it's just a wonderful group of people, and it's a really fun thing to do, but also intellectually challenging to come every Monday evening to this. So what I would like to do is just share with you some information. We have our sponsors, but we also want to encourage anybody who is so inclined to contribute to the Great Decision Legacy Fund. What we would like to do, as Tim has said many times, is to make this self-funding, so to speak, so that we're not dependent on funds from the government, from the city, or anything like that, that we can continue to have this forever for children, grandchildren, and so on. So I would encourage you to pick up one of these brochures, and small, large, whatever, please consider contributing. This is a wonderful opportunity. Some of you have some R&D money that you want to place in a really it would be well-used fund. So please seriously consider this, because it's a great event. Thanks to everybody who's participated, and thank you very much to all of you who've been here. Thank you.
Now it's my turn. So, for the last time this season, I would like to thank our sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County, the Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, and the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So, a huge round of applause for our sponsors. Before I turn it over to Professor Farrell, I just wanted to announce about two programs that are coming up that may be of interest to you. This Thursday evening, down on the main floor, in partnership with the Manitowoc County Historical Society, we're going to be doing the Flag of Company A dramatic reenactment of a Civil War flag to the Historical Society 100 years ago, actually 100 years ago today, that it was presented. And they're doing a reenactment of the ceremony that occurred at the library back in 1925 when it was on Chicago and North 9th Street, when the library was there. So the Historical Society approached me, and I thought it would be a fantastic idea to do it. So they're going to be doing that reenactment here, starting at 6 o'clock, down on the main floor. The other thing I wanted to mention is projecting forward is on Thursday, June 19th. The library is bringing Michael Perry back to Manitowoc to speak at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay Manitowoc Campus Theater. That also starts at 6 o'clock. It's also free of charge. So mark your calendars for Thursday, June 19th, 2 days after my birthday. Feel free to wish me happy birthday. Not now, but then. So let me introduce our speaker. Martin Farrell recently retired after 44 years of college and university teaching political science and international relations, the last 40 at Ripon College. He's the author of over 70 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and conference papers. He led students on 10 study abroad experiences beginning with China in 1981, and also including Russia, Eastern Europe, and Italy. His own travels and research have taken him to 47 countries on 6 continents. He also recently retired from elective office after 28 years on the Fond du Lac County Board of Supervisors, the last 16 as chair. He continues to do independent research and make public presentations, including at Manitowoc Public Library. So, without further ado, Professor Martin Farrell.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thanks to the sponsors, League of Women Voters. I do single them out because I am a member. And sorry? Says it's on. Testing?
It's on.
It's okay? They tell me it's okay. Excuse me. Yeah, I just renewed my membership in the league today. So I'm good for another year. In fact, I even ticked the box, make it automatic from now on. So, well, since I was last here in February, quite a bit has happened. We have a big topic tonight, U.S. grand strategy. And I've listed some possibilities here. Global leader, or maybe regional hegemon, imperialist plunderer, or what exactly? Why? First of all, because it's uncertain. What we do know is that about 2 months into the new Trump administration, all the signs are of a very radical break from grand strategy that we've seen since World War II. And I will be reviewing some aspects of that. Whether this new direction is a good one or not, obviously, we don't know yet, but you all are, of course, part of we the people. This is how our Constitution begins, the preamble, we the people of the United States. And so you are the people, you're the ones who should be listened to. So I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for discussion and questions, because I want to hear your ideas, because what is being proposed and carried out appears to be a very radical change from what we have had before. And maybe we need the change, or maybe we simply didn't appreciate some of the good aspects of what we had been doing. No system or no strategy is perfect, obviously. We live in a big world, over 200 different independent countries, 8 or 9 billion people. A lot can go wrong in that scope of things, but a lot of things can go right, and some things have gone right, but others certainly can be improved upon. Since I was last here, I've actually given 2 other presentations. One was in Oshkosh on the U.S. role in the global political economy. That was more of a focus on economic policy. But then I gave a conference paper in Washington, D.C. There was an Asian Studies conference sponsored by the East-West Center. And there I was focusing on Asia's role in the emerging global economy. But following that presentation and conference in Washington, D.C., we did have a little chance to travel. And so I went to, among other places, Monticello, that's the picture on the bottom, Thomas Jefferson's home that he designed and built outside Charlottesville, Virginia. And the one on top is Montpelier. That is James Madison's home, about 45 miles away. And they, of course, were very close friends throughout their entire career. Jefferson was about 10 years older. He was our 3rd president. Madison was our 4th president. When they had both retired, they went to these homes and they visited each other a great deal, very close. Now, both of them devoted their entire lives to this American experiment in a democratic republic. That was a very rare, even idea at the time. Almost all the countries of the world were ruled by monarchies, some of them absolute monarchies. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, that was a novel idea. And Jefferson and Madison devoted virtually their entire lives to trying to make sure this experiment was set up properly with the right institutions, the right constitution, the best laws possible, so that it would last. And more specifically, Jefferson warned against the possibility of a government that, despite being elected, could become tyrannical, even an elective despotism. And as he said, all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. Madison, also key architect of the U.S. Constitution, championed the rule of law as a cornerstone of a free and just society, emphasized the importance of limiting government power and ensuring accountability through checks and balances, separation of powers, and a system of independent courts. And while I was there in their homes, occupying the very space where they lived major parts of their lives, did their thinking and their working and their talking to advance this noble experiment, I couldn't help but wonder what they would think about what is going on today.
Yes.
I think they would be extremely disappointed, and they would be extremely nervous about some of the directions that we are seeing contrary to the principles that they laid down. Now, I want to reference a couple other well-known figures. Lord Acton, you've probably heard of his famous dictum, all power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency or the certainty of corruption by authority. There is no worse heresy than that the office sanctifies the holder of it. End quote. In other words, because I'm the county board chair, I can do no wrong. That's the bad example. That's the heresy he's talking about. Then we have, not as well known, but you may have heard of it, Chesterton's fence. In the matter of reforming things as distinct from deforming them, there's one plain and simple principle. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let's say for the sake of simplicity, a fence or a gate erected across a road. A reckless reformer says, I don't see the use of this, let us clear it away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do to answer, if you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. In other words, when you see something and your reaction is you don't like it, give it some thought as to why it's there. There might be a reason for it before you take out the sledgehammer and destroy it. I don't know if that's being done. I want to go back now to the origins of the existing paradigm of U.S. grand strategy. And this was forged out of the turmoil of World War II. And finally, on D-Day, June 6, 1944, a pivotal moment, we and our allies stormed the beaches, those brave men at Normandy, and started the last chapter of World War II, a great victory for the Allies. And I emphasize allies. As you can see here, the different flags represent in the landings the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. It was an Allied victory, and it was led by the United States. Here we see Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander of the landings at Normandy. He then retired from the Army, became president of Columbia University, but returned to Europe in 1951 as NATO's first Supreme Allied Commander Europe, or SASUR, heading an alliance to preserve peace through collaboration, cooperation, and strength. Eisenhower said, in all history, this is the first time that an Allied headquarters has been set up to preserve the peace and not to wage war. And NATO successfully prevented any member from being invaded for over 75 years following its establishment. That is successful. In 1950, the United States led a 22-nation alliance opposing North Korean aggression against South Korea. Again, a cooperative effort sanctioned and authorized by the United Nations Security Council. And in NATO's entire history, the Saussure position has traditionally, by agreement, been held by an American. So these are all the American, not all of them, but some of the more well-known Americans who have held that position that Eisenhower inaugurated. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of NATO has, by agreement, come from European nations. So we see some of those listed here. Jens Stoltenberg was the most recent one. Mark Rutte of the Netherlands recently took over. But this tradition is now being threatened by our current administration. They have said, or at least suggested, that they are no longer going to appoint Saussure from among the leading American generals. And of course, many people are afraid that that's just the prologue to the United States withdrawing from NATO entirely. And we will take a look at what that would mean in a few minutes. Now, this free world strategy emerging 75 years ago, it went far beyond just military cooperation, but also encompassed political, economic, and cultural institutions such as the United Nations, Marshall Plan, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, World Health Organization, European Economic Community, U.S. Agency for International Development, Paris Climate Convention, to name but a few. Hard power projection, including nuclear weapons deployment, went hand in hand with soft power initiatives, like many of these others would be categorized. We saw another great victory with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. And this, at least in the immediate short run at that time, relieved a lot of pressure that sometimes had been pretty intense during the days of the Cold War. Then another crisis occurred with the 9/11 attacks on the United States, and NATO again stepped up. For the first time, invoked Article 5, stating an attack on one member is an attack on all, and launched NATO's first operations outside the Euro-Atlantic area into Afghanistan. NATO played a key role in the military operation in Afghanistan, which began in 2003. And you see here the deaths. Yes, United States forces, including our armed forces, but also contract operators, were the majority of the deaths, but our NATO allies actually made huge sacrifices as well. And in some cases, a higher percentage of their population was sacrificed even than the United States. So they have stepped up. They have come to our aid when we were attacked. We also had economic ties and networks regarding this grand strategy. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there were a number of institutions set up, still existing. They did establish GATT, which sought to reduce tariffs and other trade restrictions. And this was done because it was believed that Smoot-Hawley tariffs and other high tariff walls in the 1930s had contributed to the conflict leading into World War II. So we saw a steady reduction in tariffs on the left-hand side. This goes back to only 1980. Tariffs before then were even much higher, but the tariffs have been coming down. And as the tariffs come down, the trade goes up. And on the right-hand side, a much longer time frame. This goes all the way back to the 1800s. But again, we didn't really see an uptick until the 1960s. And this is when President Kennedy signed some free trade legislation that contributed to increases in world trade, but also spectacular increases in world GDP going right along with them. I realize this is cut off before the present, but the GDP growth in the world has continued to rise. It's well over $100 trillion today, from just a tiny fraction of that just a few decades ago. And, you know, that is very important. It's not just a number. That represents the value added to things by men and women using their labor and their ingenuity to add value to products. And it shows their rising productivity. For example, people might have been working extremely hard on a Chinese rural commune in the 1960s or 70s, but they were working very ineffectively and they were frankly not productive. They had no machinery, they had no tools. And they also were organized in a way that made no sense under Mao Zedong. Later, they divided up these huge communes and said, each family, you may have your own plot, and you work it as you see fit. And a certain amount of your produce we will buy, but the rest you can sell in a market. And that was the beginning of the increases in productivity. And then, as they got investment from the added productivity, they began to build factories. And now people who were extremely unproductive in the countryside came to the cities and were more productive. They added much more value for every hour of work that they put in. And their wages were very low and their working conditions were not good early on. But eventually, bit by bit, building up, they continued to add to the sum total of value being created. And the really most important point is the world economy is not a zero-sum game. It's an expanding sum game if things are going right. You know, if you have a worldwide depression, it can shrink. You can actually have a decrease if you're consuming more than you're producing. But as we've seen here, the overall trend was for much, much, much growth. And so it's not the fact that if country A improves its situation, that is coming at my expense. We can both share in this. And we may not share absolutely equally, but some are starting at a much lower point. And they're obviously going to benefit more initially. So this is, I think, a record of success. Are there environmental costs to this? Of course. And I am kind of setting those aside for the present because, that's a difficult issue. Economists refer to environmental concerns, whether it be pollution, global warming, climate change, whatever it may be, as an externality. It's hard to include it in the market transaction because the costs aren't borne directly by the buyer of the good or the service. So I'm not totally ignoring that. I realize that does complicate the picture somewhat, but the real point is if people are employed more productively, the total sum of goods available in the world economy do grow. So there's more to be passed around for hopefully everyone. And this increase in trade and increase in productivity had spectacular results. And this is where I have a real problem with people who don't recognize how much progress actually has been made. Global trade increased by 12-fold. The total size of the global economy, nearly a 5-fold increase to $106 trillion. That's total amount of goods and services produced in a given year. In 1980, 46% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, that figure has been reduced to 8.1%. Average global lifespan increased from 60 years to 74 years in that same time frame. Foreign direct investment grew from 1.4 trillion to 41 trillion. That's a tremendous 29-fold increase. And by the way, the United States in most years is the leading recipient of foreign direct investment, most recently at 5.4 trillion received per year. That's money that foreigners are bringing into the United States to build factories or buy existing plant and equipment or recondition existing plant and equipment. Foreign portfolio investment, this is indirect investment, has grown even faster. So this is things like foreigners bringing money in and buying our stocks, our equities, or our bonds. Could be municipal bonds, U.S. Treasury notes, corporate bonds, financial investments. These have also increased tremendously. And here's where I do depart from some of our current spokesmen. The United States, in my opinion, and you feel free to disagree with me if you do, we have not been ripped off in this process. We have not been victimized. We have not been taken advantage of. We have benefited more than most from this system of economic interdependence. On the left-hand side, these are jobs. And as you can see, we've had almost a tripling of our workforce since 1950. A steady growth in jobs. When there is a hitch in the job creation, what is it associated with? The gray bars are recessions. So it's recessions, not foreign competition, that has hurt our job creation. Foreign trade actually creates jobs. How is that? Because if I buy something that is made abroad that is cheaper than what I can get at home, I now have more money to spend on other things. I now can buy that boat that I couldn't afford before. Or, frankly, my father was a barber. Now I can get a haircut twice a month instead of once a month. So this is how it is a net gain, not a drag. Where in this graph, and this is from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, where are all the millions of jobs supposedly stolen by foreigners? I don't see it. Here's our GDP. Now again, that's our total national gross domestic product. But as you can see, we've had faster and more spectacular growth than virtually anybody. Yeah, in a certain time period, China grew a bit faster, but the other countries, Japan actually stagnated. The European countries, much slower growth. I just do not see how it is that these other countries have been stealing from us when we have gained so much more than they have. It's been stated recently that the purpose of the European Union was to rip off the United States. Did you hear that quote? That would have been quite a surprise to Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle, both of whom wholeheartedly supported the European Economic Community, which then became the European Union. And why did they support it? Because they saw it not as a way to rip off the United States or anybody else, but as a way to prevent World War III. They'd already been through World War I, which was the most cataclysmic conflict in history up till that time, only to be vastly surpassed in death and destruction by World War II. They didn't want to go through it again. And that is why they set up these institutions and these interactions. Again, this is the United States' share of global GDP. And yes, there have been some ups and downs. And if you look, you'll see our share went up when Europe's went down, which makes sense because it's a percentage of the whole pie at that time. But overall, we had a bit higher percentage here. But if you look, starting in 2010, our share of global GDP has actually consistently increased. So that now we're at 26.3% of the entire world's GDP is produced in the United States. Now, that also means, of course, that there's about 73.5% outside of us. But still, we have by far the highest percentage. And again, I am not sure where the victimization is coming from. Maybe I'm missing something. Now, I've only talked so far about the United States as a whole and even some global things. But it is true that the benefits of the economic growth enjoyed by the United States have not been equally shared. And so as we can see that from about 1980, the top 95th percentile has gained much more than the midpoint income median or the 20th percentile. So all of a sudden, those parts of our economy, the different income levels, traditionally were rising more or less together. Starting around 1980, they did start to split apart, with the upper brackets gaining more. And if people are upset about that, they have every right to be. One reason they could look at is the marginal tax rates. So as you can see, this is originally on income over 200,000. At the end of World War II, 94% was taken. And by the time Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, the top rate was 69.13%. He immediately dropped, and now it's down to under 40% pretty consistently, a few ups and downs. So we've really drastically cut the marginal tax rate on the top income earners. Does that have to do with this splitting off? Almost certainly. And similarly, productivity gains, this is what the worker is producing, has recently outstripped the median family income. And that is also a good reason to be unhappy. But is it foreigners that are to blame for this? Or is it things like weak trade adjustment assistance? We've had laws on the books since the Kennedy administration that people who lose a job because the company loses business to foreign competition should get assistance, should get retraining, even relocation, educational enhancement. but it isn't funded. We spend less than 1/6 the amount of Denmark on trade adjustment assistance. 1/6. Other things, we have been weakening our export promotion efforts. We have these supply side tax policies that say we need to cut taxes on the top income groups because they're the ones who will then invest. So that is what we have been hearing since the days of Arthur Laffer over 40 years ago. Well, Mr. Laffer recently met with President Trump, and they had a very congenial meeting. And of course, the current president, endorses those ideas, and that's the number one legislative priority that the administration has. The tax cut, with benefits going mainly to the upper brackets. We've seen a shift in the share of national income going to capital versus labor, technological change, weakened labor unions, vastly increased executive compensation, market concentration, that is to say, not monopolies, but oligopolies forming. We had a horrible meltdown in 2008. We have reduced geographic mobility. People aren't as willing to move for jobs as they used to be. I remember, again, distinctly hearing in 2016, a young couple was interviewed on Wisconsin Public Radio. They lived in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, and they were very unhappy. So we can't get a job here for more than $8 an hour with no benefits. And therefore, they were going to vote for the candidate who promised to change that. But Prairie du Chien is located, about 35 miles from La Crosse, Wisconsin, which then was a booming economy, construction everywhere, expanding population, abundant jobs, good paying jobs. They couldn't venture 35 miles down the road to find employment. Or even if that didn't suit them, they couldn't go another 50 miles to Rochester, Minnesota, one of the fastest growing cities in the entire upper Midwest. A town that when I was growing up had about 25,000 people, the same as my hometown of Winona, Minnesota. We're in the same athletic conference. We usually beat them. I hope. I wish. Rochester, Minnesota today is over 120,000 people. Tremendous. But if you're not willing to move 25 or 50 miles, it's hard for me to be entirely sympathetic. China shock. Obviously, we could spend a lot of time on this. It is true that China's manufacturing did impact certain parts of the country more than others. However, the most recent analysis, and you can read a lot about it, but the most recent analysis concludes that there were aggregate welfare gains in both countries. In other words, overall, both countries were better off, but there were winners and losers in the United States, and there were some communities, and these are the communities that could have and should have been helped with trade assistance. Why weren't they? Because whenever it was brought up in the Congress, certain members of Congress said, no, that's welfare, and we're not dispensing welfare. I don't happen to think it's welfare, but that I was not on the winning side in those discussions. These studies also conclude that China trade was not a leading cause of manufacturing employment decline in the United States. So again, I understand there are concerns about our manufacturing sector. And now we're hearing that the plan is to reindustrialize the United States. But if you look at the actual facts, again, up here is output. Yes, this is the value of the output. It did peak just before the financial meltdown. But then again, you see where are the dips in the output? It's always with the recessions. So those are what actually harm our manufacturing output. And since the last recession, of course, then we had a big one here with COVID, but a short one. Manufacturing output has largely recovered and is much higher today than it was earlier decades. And now manufacturing employment here, yes, it has gone down. But is that because of foreign competition, or is that because of technological change? And I'm going to argue that it's mainly because of technological change. But for the moment now, this idea that we have to reindustrialize the United States. The fact is that in all developed economies, employment shifts from agriculture first, then to manufacturing, and then to services. And so again, here's employment in the United States going all the way back to the end of World War II. And you can see that services and construction and total employment have grown a lot. Manufacturing and mining and agriculture have not. But again, go back to the year 1900, over half our workforce was in agriculture. And yes, after World War II, we had a much higher percentage in manufacturing. But over time, you get more efficient with labor in manufacturing. And therefore, that you can produce the same amount or more of goods with fewer and fewer workers. So they then move into the service sector. But if you look at this chart, it shows you that manufacturing and mining, their actual contribution to GDP has continued to rise, even though their employment hasn't. But they're contributing more and more each year to the GDP. So we're getting more bang for the buck, being the hour of labor. And we look at steel specifically. Again, this is total tons of steel shipped in the United States. And it's obviously grown dramatically since 1900. Now the green dots indicate imports, plus the blue dots are our newer steel plants. But as you can see, we're still making a lot of steel. Some of it is imported, but most of it isn't. And again, do we need steel for our defense industries? Yes, but we have way more than enough. The official estimates that I have seen say that our armed forces need only about 10% of the steel and aluminum output that our companies currently are making. And yes, we're using a bit more imported steel than we used to. But again, I'm not sure if I have told you this story before or not, forgive me, but I happen to be quite familiar with Alliance Laundry, makes Speed Queen machine, largest in the world in terms of commercial washers and dryers. I believe they bought a factory here in Manitowoc, and they're employing people there, probably at least a few hundred. And that was a factory that was abandoned by a previous company. They're very successful. But when I toured their plant, which I have done several times because as a county board chair, we help them occasionally with loans in order to expand their facility, build a new warehouse, several expansions like that. But as I viewed the factory floor, you know, they make their machines largely from scratch, to tell you the truth. So they start out with these big, huge rolls of steel, and that they are unfurled into these huge stamping machines that stamp out the panels for the sides, bottom, top, and so forth of the washers and dryers. And I mean, these machines, I think they cost at least $3 million each. And they stamp out 7 or 8 pieces at a time, different, you know, jigs and so forth. But I asked them, all that steel, where do you get that steel? And the answer was, it depends. Okay, it depends on what? Who's offering the steel we want at the price we want? And sometimes it's American steel, sometimes it's Canadian steel, sometimes it's Chinese steel. But we're buying what is the best deal for us to make the product that we want to make at the best price that we can make it. Now, what is wrong with that? That is my question. We'll see, there's a lot more of that going on. But this is called a market. This is giving the consumer, in this case, Alliance Laundry, the opportunity to choose from a number of different suppliers. And they are choosing the ones that best suit their needs. Now here, again, this shows you the productivity gain. These are the number of jobs in the steel industry, which have gone down. But on the other hand, it correlates very closely with the number of man hours needed to make a ton of steel. So as you can see, the smaller number of workers can make just as much steel, if not more, because they're more productive. Whoops. Now, this is, believe it or not, this is all pertinent to the big topic. The smiling curve. This is why I think shows, I'm sorry, I used kind of a strong word there. I guess I was getting worked up. The futility of reindustrialization. Why do I say reindustrialization is not a good idea? Because the actual manufacturing of goods is the least remunerative in the whole process. So as you can see, the value is on the left-hand axis here. And the high value is in the basic and applied research and development, the design, and the commercialization on the front side. And on the back side, again, the most value added is the marketing, advertising, brand management, logistics, after-sales services. The least value added is in the actual manufacturing. So why would you want to stop doing these things, which are service jobs, and do these things, which are much lower paid? Now, specifically, we're talking about an iPhone now. And if you look and see that here's Apple on this high value end, the early end, and they're doing those basic and applied research, development, product design, supply chain management. And then as we go down, we get other countries involved. And finally, the lowest value added, these are one US company, 2 Taiwanese companies. Then we go back to the other upside, advertising, that's a US firm. And then finally, Apple, marketing, brand management, after sales services. So again, why would you want to move from the high value added to the low value added? I don't see why you would. The other chart here shows us these are all the different firms and countries involved in making an iPhone. So as you can see, there are over 300 firms in China, 139 in Japan, 60 in the United States, et cetera, but well over 30 different countries. This is what is made possible by, again, not totally free interaction or trade, but relatively free. In other words, letting the market, just like Alliance Laundry chooses the best steel, here Apple Company chooses the best firms to make certain parts of their iPhone. And you can see this is obviously a tremendously complicated process and had to be developed over years, and a tremendous amount of communication, working together to figure out exactly who's doing what to make it all work. But this is what apparently somebody can't stand and wants to destroy. Just smash all this up, and somehow we'll just do it all in the United States, and somehow we'll be better off. But in fact, I don't think we'd be better off. Again, this is kind of complicated. We're running short on time, but see, this is what China is specializing in. Low skill, low pay. And this is what we are specializing in. High skill, high pay. Now, why would you want to switch from what we are doing with high skilled labor, high compensation, and go back to the industrial age and magnify and expand low-paying, low-skilled jobs? Now, it does put a certain burden on the workforce, but that's why we have an educational system. That's why we have all kinds of levels of education, all kinds of training, and that needs to be taken advantage of. But there's no reason, again, if you want to create jobs, why don't we go back to the horse and buggy age? Think of all the blacksmith jobs you could create, harness makers, and most important of all, manure shoveling. Do you know how many million tons of manure were on the streets of New York City in 1895? Okay, even I wasn't there, but I've heard it was a lot. And you had a rainstorm, I'll tell you, that must have been really something. Sorry, I hope you've all eaten. Okay, trade imbalances. That's another red herring. Yes, it is true that the United States runs overall trade deficits in goods. We run trade surpluses. The green is services. Again, sometimes these are way overestimated, but again, the vast majority of economists will tell you it doesn't even matter, because it's simply not important. It's more of an accounting thing. Again, think about it just in terms of supply and demand. What if we are buying more things with dollars than other people are buying from us? Well, that means there'll be more dollars out there in the world, right? And what generally happens, everything else remaining constant, as economists like to say, if the supply of something goes up, what generally happens to the price of it? Goes down. So the price or value of the dollar should go down if there's a surplus of dollars out there. And that would then even things out, because then if my dollar is worth less, I can't buy as many imports as I could before. And conversely, the price of my exports will be cheaper, so I'll sell more of those. So it should balance out. Okay, but it hasn't. Why not? Because people like dollars. They overvalue dollars. They'd rather have dollars than anything else because it's safest, most stable. And the really good news is they reinvest most of it here in the United States, either in direct investment or indirect investment, buying our bonds, government bonds as well as corporate bonds, stocks, sometimes real estate, but that's getting into direct investment. But that's also part of it. Again, the statement was made recently excuse me. So because of trade deficits, we are subsidizing Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year. Okay, first of all, the figure is totally unrealistic. The fact is, we have a small trade deficit with Canada of about 65 to 70 billion. And that's only in energy imports. In services and all other goods other than oil and gas, we actually have a trade surplus with Canada. Now, why are we importing so much oil and natural gas from Canada? Don't we produce a surplus ourselves? Aren't we actually net exporters of both of those things? So why are we importing from them and exporting to all these other countries? Good question. The answer is it's not all the same stuff. So Canada produces some certain types of oil which are desirable for certain processes that we need. And some of our domestically produced petroleum isn't as well suited for those same purposes. So again, it's the market. It's the companies making these choices. So they say it makes sense for us to export this oil, but we need this other kind that we can get from Canada, so we will import that. Again, why is it necessary to mess this up? Let the companies make their decisions based on what they need. That's how a market is supposed to work. And then we as customers decide. So again, what is a subsidy? A subsidy would be I'm giving you something and I'm not getting anything in return. But for however many tens of billions of dollars that we use to buy things from Canada, what do we get for that? We get stuff. We get lumber. We get that oil. We get maple syrup. We get whatever it is we want. And I'll tell you, I'm as much of a nationalist as anybody. And when I go to the grocery store and I see in the grocery store the nicest, best looking tomatoes, the heirloom type tomato, and I pick it up and I look at it and it says product of Canada, I'm not happy about that. But I'm not upset with them. I'm upset with us. How can Canada, with their climate and their geography, produce better tomatoes than we can? They're just doing something that we ought to be able to do, but we're not. So they're not to blame, we're to blame. If we can grow better tomatoes than them at a cheaper price, nobody's stopping you. Go right ahead. And so it is not a subsidy. It is not a gift. We're getting exactly what we paid for with every penny. But it's a tough battle. Here's yet another reason these trade balances are deceptive. When the iPad or iPhone is assembled and then exported to the United States, let's say, the entire price is counted as an import, when in fact the component costs are distributed, with the United States getting the vast majority of it and other countries getting some based on what they have contributed. But yet it's counted 100% as an import for the US. So it's another reason trade balances are important. Just briefly, higher trade deficits do not correlate with higher unemployment, job loss, and higher trade surpluses do not correlate with bigger GDP growth. So this concern with trade balances is completely misplaced. Again, most of this money comes back into the United States anyway. So this is a growing foreign direct investment in the United States, getting more and more every year. That builds factories or it buys existing factories. Giddings and Lewis machine tool company in Fond du Lac was on the verge of going out of business. Then it was bought up by Fives, F-I-V-E-S. It's a French company, and they've continued to run it and maintain it. It is not what it was in its heyday, but they saved it from going out of business and saved a number of high-paying jobs because of that foreign investment. All right, finally, I say the Trump doctrine, if there is a doctrine, appears to completely reject the strategy of the last 80 years. And again, I say appears because it is early. And I'm willing to, answer any questions and any comments. Maybe this is all, we're sometimes told this is all about bargaining chips. It's just about bargaining chips and getting better deals. But I don't know if that really answers it. At first, I could have believed that. But when you talk about annexing Canada over and over and over again, and you say we're going to take Greenland one way or the other, and you refuse to rule out the use of force to do so, to me, that is a radical departure from what has been our leadership role in defending existing borders of sovereign nations within a rule-based world order. And that, of course, did not work perfectly, but it kept us out of World War III. And we have some analogs to World War III right now, with an aggressor in Russia attacking a sovereign nation, not respecting its borders. And it almost seems that U.S. policy now is the policy that failed to contain Hitler, namely appeasement. That, again, appears. We'll see what the final outcome is, but it appears to be appeasement. And as many historians have pointed out, when borders are allowed to be contested, wars will follow. So there's historic precedent for the need. When the borders have been drawn, they need to be defended. Are we even devolving to the imperialist principle of might makes right in a Hobbesian social Darwinist world of the survival of the fittest, where the great powers do as they please and the smaller powers, take the hindmost? This is what I fear is the mindset in Washington today. That we, the United States, have the biggest military, we have the biggest economy, we can do whatever we want. And if you don't like it, you'll pay the price. Panama Canal, treaty, solemn treaty, ratified by the U.S. Senate, apparently meaningless. Could the United States military defeat the Panamanian military? Yes. But is that the route we want to go? I think as citizens, you have a right to your opinion, and you have a right to make that opinion known. It appears to involve abandoning efforts to build strategic, economic, scientific, and cultural independence and cooperation. Instead, it just rubbishes longstanding friends and allies as rip-off artists and or parasites. You'd think standing with the NATO allies for 75 years, and I showed they stood by us in times of need as well as we stood by them. There's absolutely no feeling for that at all in what we are seeing currently. These are just parasites, rip-off artists. In the other talk last time, I showed that most of the NATO nations have increased their defense spending to the 2% level. There are a few that still haven't, but they are increasing. They now know, and Germany just recently took action as they amended their constitution to allow more borrowing because they know they're going to have to build their military up because they don't feel they can depend on the United States anymore. And maybe they should be standing on their own 2 feet. But I think you understand that for many years, we weren't super enthusiastic about a rearmed Germany or Japan. And was there a reason for that? Okay, maybe that reason is now obsolete. But again, if you take away the US nuclear deterrent, yes, UK and France have nuclear weapons, but Germany will probably need to have them too. So now we want a nuclear armed Germany. And again, if the US also withdraws from Asia, because we were told that, again, both Japan and South Korea are ripping us off. So if we withhold our support for their sovereignty, then they'll need nuclear weapons too, because we know North Korea has them right there and China has them. So now we're getting into nuclear proliferation, which I would at least argue could be and has been prevented by US leadership. But if we're not willing to play that role anymore, then other countries are going to have their nuclear arsenals as well. And finally, erecting nationalist walls against everything foreign to apparently build an autarkic state bent on expansion in all these areas. Is that where we're going? So finally, is it a new golden age, or are we repeating the mistakes of the past? In a revised, disorderly imperial age, megalomania rules the waves and waves the rules. We've been down this path before. We know that it led to world wars, that the global rules-based order, for all its well-known faults, was meant to avoid repeating and did prevent from happening again for 75 years. But is this other path the one we wish to go down? So with that, I'll thank you very much and open it up to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Farrell. We will divide the audience into 2 parts. The left side, this is not a competition. The left side will be handled by the lovely and talented Stacy Bialik. As you face Professor Farrell, I will work the right-hand side. So even though this is the last time, hands up if you have a question or comment, and let's try and let everyone get at least one question or comment before you move on to your second question or comment. Oh, right here.
Yeah, there's some discussion in the news tonight about soft power, but I grew up in Canada. I have dual citizenship, and it seems to me that one of the great ingredients of a stable international order is that nations can trust one another. And I think at this point, I mean, my relatives do not trust Donald Trump, and I think that's not going to rebound very quickly either. Is there any way you can calculate the importance of that, or
well,
is it? And if you were the Prime Minister of Canada, what would your reaction be to the Trump talks?
Well, first of all, I like the premise of your question, that if we want a stable world order, which I think is really extremely important, that's in our interests. You know, when we got attacked at Pearl Harbor and had to fight the Japanese and then also entered into Europe, that cost us 500,000 lives. That's just deaths and untold maiming and, you know, the money I won't even go into. War is extremely costly, and it's so much easier to destroy than to build up. So that's why we have an interest in stability, and we should not be poo-pooing stability, as if we don't get anything out of it. When we have stability, then we can enter into these mutually advantageous agreements. But if you don't believe that there is such a thing as a mutually advantageous agreement, that if somebody's gaining, somebody else must be losing, if that's your mindset, well, then you don't see any value in cooperation. You don't see any value in having friends. You don't see any value in having people that can trust you, or that you have any kind of affection for at all. So this is a problem. I've seen estimates that we could lose, tens of billions of dollars in tourism money from Canada already. And I won't even talk about the liquor sales that they've taken off the shelves. So, yeah, I think, look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the world is worse even than Machiavelli thought. And that the baddest of the bad junkyard dogs is the one that will come out on top. But that isn't how we pursued it for the last 75 years. And as I've tried to show, I spent a lot of time trying to show we benefited from these arrangements, at least as a whole. And if we didn't spread the benefits around amongst our own population the way we could have or should have, that's our fault. So yes, trust is extremely important. Reliability, keeping your word. If I say I've made this treaty with you, I will keep it. And if I really see a problem with it, let's get together. We can renegotiate it. I'll show you what the problem is. This is why we need to adjust this. And hopefully you can come to a resolution. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Trump's first time around, there were other adults in the room that kind of kept him levelish. So now there's no adults in the room to kind of keep him at bay. So let's say he's doing all this damage. He's burning bridges as fast as he can burn them. But it's only 4 years, right? Unless he does something else. But the other countries know that it's a limited 4-year disaster. Is there a way that we could, are we allowed to do this? Can we just secretly go to these other countries and call them and say, just so you know, it's going to be a bad 4 years. He's a nut job. Just hang in there. We're all in this together. We know what you're thinking. We're thinking it too. Hang in there, and we're all going to be good. And one day after the 4-year mark, we're good. Can we do that, or is that illegal?
Well,
the money for all the United States government, this law against.
right,
I think it's
Logan Act.
more, yes.
According to the Logan Act, a private citizen is not supposed to be conducting foreign policy negotiations.
It has happened many times.
Although it has been violated, yes, and I could go into some of those. Yeah, the problem with what you're saying also is that it's not just one person, there is actually a movement.
There is.
And if he may have a successor who thinks in the same way. Again, now what is, okay, I'm trying to be fair, but the worldview of Steve Bannon and other people that have been sort of guiding our president over the years, they are just ardent nationalists. And Stephen Miller, one of his advisors, they just hate anything foreign. And I use the term autarky. An autarkic state is a state that has economically closed itself off to the rest of the world and just is trying to build up strictly from within. And usually nations do that when they know they're going to start a war. I'm not accusing them of that. But for whatever reason, they just cannot stand these global interactions. You know, does it bother me if I see there's 30 different countries contributed to the making of my iPhone? No. You know, that doesn't bother me at all. I think that's great because these people are benefiting, then they can buy our products. And I'm not a crass materialist, but I can also go visit the country without having stones thrown at me. Let me give you another quick example from Alliance Laundry. Excuse me. Do you know what their largest growth market for their machines is right now? Latin America. Mike Shaby, the CEO, I happen to know him personally. He's been headquartered in Miami for the last 4 years, and a couple other of the top brass. Why are they in Miami? Because their biggest increase in sales is in Latin America. And again, I don't want anybody to take this, in the wrong way. But it's not just Latin America, it's Southeast Asia, it's China. I've been in China, I've seen these bicycles with carts carrying 10 or 12 Kohler toilets, all different color, in the back of the bicycle. These are people who frankly used a pit toilet until a few years ago. And again, this is not negative, but these are people who frankly were washing their clothes in the river not that long ago. Now they can go to the laundromat. And if they continue to improve their standard of living, they pretty soon will be able to have that washer and dryer in their own house or apartment. And that makes us better off, they're better off. This idea of beggar your neighbor, if my neighbor is poorer, I'm better off, is false. We cannot survive as an island of prosperity in a sea of misery. We cannot prosper and survive. It's much better to cooperate, see all boats rising, which they can, and in fact, they have been. Not exactly evenly, not perfectly. There's environmental issues. I'm aware of that. But in general, I think the autarkic idea is a huge mistake. But that's the mindset of the whole movement, apparently. Okay, was there here? Yeah.
So, do you think that the business community is, which seems to be kowtowing, is going along with this movement, or do you think they're just trying to kind of save their butts and not get run over by Trump and his cronies?
Well, I haven't had a chance to, talk to too many of them myself, but from the press accounts that I have read, there is a lot of concern because a lot of these things could be very harmful. But I think also, I'll just say this as well, just the chaos of it is unsettling to any business person. Again, they have to try to make plans. Where am I going to get this? Where am I going to get that? And they have their supply chains. And yes, there's problems with lengthy supply chains. We saw that during COVID, and I understand that. So if you can nearshore things to prevent that, fine. That's part of your calculation, as a leader of a business. But I think that most of them know that tariffs will hurt their business. And but they're just hoping that it's this bargaining chip thing and that it will shake out. And if it doesn't, then they'll have to adjust to this new world. And they'll do what they can to adjust to it. Now, but are they pushing back on it? I don't know. I'm not sure. I know that even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a pretty conservative organization, they have come out against these tariffs. But they obviously aren't being listened to because, again, I try not to make this about personalities, but he's in love with tariffs because it's a weapon he can use to hurt people, to punish people, to try to coerce them, into doing what he thinks he wants them to do. And that's why he likes them. It's a club. I cut out but didn't bring today 2 articles from yesterday's newspaper. Yes, I sometimes actually read a real newspaper. But these are small businesses on both sides of the US-Canadian border. And they are both really hurting. One of them happens to be a Canadian and he's just expanded, put a couple million. He makes foods that use rice as the main ingredient. And then he processes it. Looks like some of you may have seen the same article. It was in the New York Times yesterday. But where did he get his rice from? The United States. Then he processes, that's Louisiana. He processes it into these treats and then he sells them both to Canada and the United States. But he said, I'm not buying any more machinery right now because I don't know what's going to happen here. If they're going to slap these tariffs and everything, obviously the US market is bigger than the Canadian market. So he can do much better dealing with 330 million people compared to 30 million people. And that's a big advantage that the United States does have. But it's causing pain already. And these people don't deserve this. They didn't do anything wrong. They're not stealing from us. They're selling us something, and if we don't want to buy it, don't buy it. It's completely voluntary. Now, I mentioned that the U.S. obviously is the world's biggest economy. And that, I think, again, this is part of what the president is relying on. That in order to keep access to this biggest, potentially most lucrative market, people will make all kinds of concessions. But then I'm agreeing with the gentleman that asked the first question. No, these people have pride. And they are not going to just cave in. If the United States, for example, decides to turn its back on Europe, I have a whole page of ways they can strike back. And also their economy in the European Union, especially if you add back in Britain and Norway, who aren't members but could be cooperating, that's nearly as big as the US. And then I gave this talk 2 weeks ago in Washington about the Asian economy. Asia is, as a whole, even bigger. You put in Japan, China, India, Southeast Asia, South Korea, it's huge. Also, Asia is the most rapidly developing area of the world. There's something called a global consumer, okay? A global consumer is somebody who spends the equivalent of $12 a day outside the home on consumer goods. Over 2/3 of the new emerging global consumers are in Asia. So Europe, Asia, if the United States wants to just simply go its own way, you go right ahead. Europe buys 35% of our oil and over 50% of our liquefied natural gas. They could close down the SWIFT system. That's the system of international payments based in Belgium. Our firms wouldn't be able to conduct any business through that service. What are those very popular weight loss drugs? Wegovy and, those are made in Europe. In the Netherlands, there's a company called ASML. They are the only producer of the 7 nanometer or less computer chips. They're the only ones. Those are the most advanced. And they make 90% of the 14 nanometer ones. The Europeans control container shipping. Have you seen it? Maersk and the others, they control most of that. A lot of other things. So if the United States really does want to abandon all of its former friends and allies and economic partners, there are other places for them to go. We might still be the biggest single one, but if you alienate enough people, they have other places to go.
Two things. One, regarding what you were saying about oil, because a lot of people wonder why is it that the United States import oil while at the same time they export oil. And I think what I heard is that the oil companies in the United States that do not want to invest in refineries that can refine United States oil, and the federal government doesn't have a mechanism to tell or to force the oil companies. It's kind of like in the crisis of 2009, where the FCC did not have the authority to tell these companies, 5 of them bankruptcy now, and also grab the guy of the FCC. You're gonna tell them, I don't care if you have the authority. But the other thing is, an interesting development is in the Trump first presidency, he received a visit of a famous British politician. His name is Nigel Farage. Apparently the Queen told Nigel Farage an offer that Trump would like to make the United States join the British Commonwealth. He didn't say anything, but he was very enthusiastic. But this is a very interesting development because Trump is very euphoric. He met King Charles, and so do you think that he will do it? He has a chance to have this big market of 55 nations, although at the same time there is a political side. Every nation of the British Commonwealth, the state
Head of state
the head of state is the king,
is the monarch.
is the monarch. And for example, everything, for example, if you go to Canada, Australia, you see in the traffic signs the crown. That's His Majesty Canadian. Yeah, if you are a lawyer and you represent the government in Canada, it's the crown.
Very good. No, first on your first point on the oil, that's a good specific illustration of my general point, that there's different kinds of oil for different purposes, and some have to be refined in certain ways and others not. So you put a very nice specific example of that. Yes, I was this kind of astounded me. But that's part of Mr. Trump's charm, that he's always had something new, and he commands attention. And there are political scientists who think that's his number one asset, just that he keeps front and center, and he's so omnipresent and ubiquitous that he seems inevitable. And why shouldn't we vote for him? Because he's around on everything all the time anyway. So maybe this is an example of this. But yeah, how the United States, the first country to break away from the British Empire, fought a war, a revolutionary war, had a Declaration of Independence, fought a war, established a new country and a new constitution. Somehow we're going to join the British Commonwealth.
Right.
Of all these
Borders might say, because they are very nationalistic, the MAGA borders.
I'm waiting to hear. I think I only heard this, I think, today or yesterday at the earliest. Yeah, this doesn't fit in with a lot of the other things. The contempt for foreigners, but I guess he makes an exception for royalty. I can't explain it. You're right in the sense that I'm pretty sure it's a requirement of the Commonwealth. You see, they all have parliamentary systems. They don't have a president. They have a prime minister, and the prime minister is head of government. but the monarch is the head of state,
Yeah.
the figurehead. And also, I think, I'm not familiar with Canadian courts. Fortunately, I haven't been arrested up there lately. No, not ever, but do they, the prosecutor doesn't, like in the United States, what do we say? It's the people. It's the people against the defendant. It's the people against Jones.
Always the problem.
It's the crown.
Yeah, and if you're a lawyer that practices in the courts.
Yeah.
With the King's Counsel.
So that is like oil and water, trying to mix our system. And I will give you a personal anecdote from that also, that one time I did go to the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario. Went to a couple plays there. And as an American, frankly, I was kind of offended when at the intermission of the play, so we're going to get up and take a break, the public address announcer said, and he'd already told us that the Governor General representing the Crown was in attendance. Would we please stand and remain standing while the Governor General went out into the lobby first? That stuck in my craw. We're not used to that kind of class distinction. We're supposed to be equal.
Or egalitarian.
We're supposed to be equal.
States.
Yeah, but we're supposed to be equal. I didn't care for that. I didn't object. I was a visitor. I tried to be polite, but it kind of stuck in my craw a little bit. We're not used to this. So yeah, that's one that's a little bit hard to fit into the overall pattern. But in terms of getting attention, dominating the news, it almost doesn't matter what it is, as long as it doesn't matter if it's negative. All publicity is good publicity. Anything that keeps me in the headlines. Darlene.
First of all, I thank you for being so honest about the situation, because I think, we all are very concerned about the future. But what can we as citizens where can we have the maximum approach to making our voices known? I imagine that there's a multiple way, but what do you see? How do you see us getting out of this situation?
Well, it's going to be very difficult because of the power configuration in Washington. I think we have to support the things, if we believe in our traditions of our Constitution, Jefferson, Madison, the other founders. Jefferson said tyranny becomes inescapable when good people remain silent.
Right.
So just don't remain silent. And that doesn't mean do anything illegal, but there's many different ways. There's letters to the editor. I guess there's social media, although I don't know if that does more harm than good, but there there are ways, and just you have to keep working at it. I've given all these talks over all these years, and I try to make sure that it's not partisan. But it's I have to try to tell the truth, because that is my duty as an educator. I didn't take a formal vow, but the whole idea behind what we're doing is to try to develop and expand knowledge. Yes, help students think critically, think of a lot of different ideas and different approaches. Always have done that. But if I think that a lot of false things are being said about what we've been doing strategically, politically, economically for the last 75 years, if I'm told there's just been a horrible disaster and I have facts that tell me otherwise, I have to stick to the facts. And so that's what I'm trying to do. But you each have your own, who is your member of Congress? What district are you even in? I don't even know.
Like,
Okay, it's the same. You know, you didn't ever have Mike Gallagher? You did?
Green Bay.
Yeah. At least, he was someone that obviously was educated. He even had a doctorate in international relations as well as his. Yeah, well, yeah, that's really what I was getting at. He quit. He couldn't take it.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody that was actually really well qualified. Whether I didn't agree with him all the time by any means, but at least he was qualified. He's driven out.
I have a question over here.
Where are you? Oh, okay.
Many of the things you've been talking about are clearly on the mind of business owners, small to large, and, anybody who's thinking much at all. But part of me wonders, this looks like it could cause serious damage, what Trump has called a little bit of pain, but worth it in the long run. Is it possible that the pain will come fast enough and obnoxious enough that, say, 20% of Trump's base, will look around and say, oh, the price of eggs is still going up, my kids can't afford it. Like, is it possible?
I hope so.
Okay.
The one thing that makes me not too optimistic on this, and this cuts both ways, that unfortunately, again, I don't agree with this, but as a nation, we have become so partisan that our partisan leanings shape our perception. So if you're an ardent Trump supporter, it doesn't matter if the economists say the GDP just fell by 15%. I don't believe that because I'm not allowed to believe that. And that's just fake news. See, I've been conditioned to reject anything. And unfortunately, many Democrats are the same. They also, if it's Biden's economy, oh, it's good. Even if there are some things that weren't so good. And this should not be happening on either side. We should try to be objective and look for what is good policy. But this is why I try to point out that even in the long term, regardless of short term, whether it causes recession, which I'm obviously against because that's very painful for a lot of people, but this reindustrialization idea, that's a bad idea long term. That just does not make sense. It's like a commissar in the Soviet Union saying we have to build more steel mills. Why? Well, just to build steel mills. This is to show that we still have industry. Folks, we still have industry. I showed you the figures, but also I don't get over here too much, but I drive around the Fox Valley quite a bit. It's factory after factory after factory. Now, they're not all big like Mercury Marine or Oshkosh Truck. A lot of them are small. I don't have any idea what the heck they're doing. But there's 50 cars in the parking lot. They must be doing something. And it's clearly manufacturing. I know there's some Rust Belt parts of the country. And I emphasize we should have done more about that. And as a local leader, I tried to make sure that didn't happen to where I was. And so if it meant lending $50 million to Mercury Marine so they didn't pull up and leave, which they were going to, we got most of that back. And what we didn't get back was the forgiveness for the number of jobs they created. They were only at 2,000 or less than 2,000 jobs. Recently, they had over 4,000 employees. And that maybe 20 million was the ultimate subsidy. It was the amount forgiven, which is a lot. They leveraged that into 1.5 billion of their own investment. They built 7 new buildings on the property. And as I said, doubled their employment. But that's what you have to do rather than sit around and cry and moan. Be proactive and make sure. And yes, there are communities that are hurting. In many cases, it's not their own fault. But you have to adjust. Look at Pittsburgh. You know, everybody been to Pittsburgh lately? That was Steel City. The steel mills are all gone and have been for 30 years. Is that a hellhole? No, it's a thriving city. Why? They reinvented themselves. In what areas? Education, healthcare, high tech, all kinds of up-to-date things, new things. They gave up on the old. Yeah, that was the past. But they didn't give up entirely. They made efforts to bring in the new. So that's what you have to do. One more?
No. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
Oh.
Stacy, as you can tell, look at the clock. We got to get everyone out by 8. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay at the library. Thank you so much, Professor Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you before next year, but if not, next year for sure. Have a great night, and thanks for coming, everyone.
Great job, guys.
You were
Thank you.
excellent.
Well,
Oh, you were
thank you.
so much. Your knowledge base is